All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Dennis Pennington, Wheat Extension Specialist with Michigan State University. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about wheat harvest and whatnot. So before I get started though, how's wheat look in your area? Decent? I see some heads shaking. I got it.
Nuevo County is bad.
Nuevo County is bad. Okay. Yeah, you're that from Nuevo County, kind of a strip right up along, like say 57 and 46, right through the center part of the state. That's probably the driest part in the state right now, from what I've seen. So is wheat's burning up?
Yeah, Nuevo County average is 68 bushel to the acre, and I walked with an insurance adjuster on Monday, and they're like 28 is what they're
28.
thinking to that.
Yeah, that's bad. So. Yeah, so I did you get any rain recently here?
2/10.
2/10.
Saturday or Sunday.
Saturday. Did anybody get a half inch or more?
Yeah.
Yeah? Oh, you're living right.
Lenawee County.
In Lenawee County. Okay, yep. That's that southeast corner got a little more rain than the rest of the state did.
I only got 1,500s.
Only 1,500s? Are you from down that way?
No, 7 miles north of here.
Oh, 7 miles north, yeah. Yeah. Well, I was all excited. It was raining yesterday, and it rained for 2 or 3 hours. Okay, maybe rain is a little bit optimistic. It was sprinkling, it was misting, and I went out and checked the rain gauge, and the dust in the bottom was wet. So that was how much we got last night. So, yep. So it was a good day. All right, so the wheat crop has come through kind of a tough time. We've had drier conditions, and we had some really hot temperatures during pollination. Temperatures of 88 degrees or higher during pollen formation and fertilization. The high 88 degrees or higher will actually inhibit pollen formation and pollination because wheat is self-pollinated. So there are parts of the state that were pollinating or flowering during that high temperatures we had. What was it, 2 weeks ago or so? Or has it been 3 weeks ago now? But there were some areas that were pollinating under those conditions. If you have the high temperatures before flowering or after flowering, the yield penalty is much less severe. But those that were flowering during that time, what'll happen is within the head there will be a number of florets that will just not have any seed in it. It won't pollinate, it won't fertilize, and there'll be no seed set in there, so you get less seeds per head in those areas. Now we have since come into a drier or a cooler spell, which has been a godsend really, because with the cooler temperatures, physiological development in wheat slows down, and that is helping us to deal with the water stress that we have in the crop right now. So, I mean, we all need rain, and none of us gets enough of it, it seems like. At least not right now, we're not. There's times we get too much, but at least the coolness that we've had has helped reduce some of the stress on the wheat crop at this point. Back in February, our projected state yield, average state yield was set at 83 bushels to the acre. Anybody know what they just updated it to? 76. Okay, so that's our projected state average yield for wheat for this year as it stands right now. And that projection came out about the time when we had those high temperatures during pollination. So that number could come back a little bit lower even. But I think there's going to be some parts of the state that are going to have the 28 bushel yield like what you were talking about, and there's going to be some that are going to have 120. We have up in the thumb, there's some stuff that looks really good. Our Huron County State Yield Trial location, we've got real tall, thick biomass. It has manure applied to it, and I think we've got really good yield potential there. We're still not dry enough to where it's firing up at that location yet. So. All right, any questions about wheat before we start talking about harvest? Yeah.
How do you tell when it's psychologically mature, like corn black layers?
Yeah, so how do you know when wheat is physiologically mature? Well, that's actually leads into one of the things that we're going to talk about here. So So physiological maturity is when the stem below the head, and this stem is called the peduncle, when that turns yellow, that means you've reached physiological maturity. So as long as it is green, even if it's still light green, it is still translocating water nutrients and filling that grain. So the longer you can keep that stem green, the better. So some people try putting on a late season nitrogen application. Certainly water stress is going to reduce that period, and it'll start turning yellow much quicker. But anything you can do to keep that stem green longer, and keep that grain fill or grain fill period going, you're going to have higher yield. I had some. We're increasing the number of acres of irrigated wheat in the state of Michigan. So I've had quite a few questions this year from producers under irrigation about, okay, so when do I cut water on this? I had a guy call me just yesterday and said, well, my wheat's all firing up. I'm matured. When should I cut the water to it? And I said, well, just because the leaves are fired up on the bottom doesn't mean you're at physiological maturity. You got to check the stem. I said, keep the water coming to it until all those stems have turned yellow, and then shut the water off where you have irrigation. I have had some producers talk about double cropping soybean, and so they're like, what can I do to get the wheat crop harvested any earlier? So desiccation is one of the things they were talking about. How early do they desiccate? And you do not want to do it until you've reached physiological maturity, because you're just going to be cutting your yield potential. So what happens if we don't get any more rain, it stays dry like it is? The forecast is temperatures are going to go back up into the 80s here over the next week or so. What's going to happen to our yield and test weights? Yield's going to probably continue to go down where we have moisture stress. What are you expecting on test weight this year? Test weights are going to be down, right? Because when we have the high temperatures and we have water stress, the carbohydrate accumulation in the kernel doesn't happen. Okay, so what happens is you get the structure of the kernel, but it doesn't fill with flour. So from a milling perspective, is that good or bad?
Yeah.
That's bad, right? What is one of the most important things that the millers want? Flour yield, right? Okay, so the more starch that accumulates in that kernel, the higher value it is, because they're going to break that kernel open, extract the starch. They use the germ and the bran for things too, but the flour is probably the most important thing that they're looking for. Okay, and that is one of the most important things that they are buying from you when they buy your wheat, is they're buying flour, or what's going to be flour from you. So I expect lower flour yields, and usually what happens in these dry periods is protein content goes up. And it's not that you're done anything different with the plant to try to increase protein. It's just a fact that if the kernel is smaller and there's less flour in it, on a percentage-wise, the percentage of protein is higher. So if that kernel was able to fill completely, that percentage of protein would be more in a normal range. So I think we're going to see high protein. We're going to see low flour yield. And I think we're going to see low test weights this year in parts of the state of Michigan. There's going to be some areas I think are still going to do okay, but there's going to be some areas where that's going to be an issue.
Where does that falling numbers fall in?
Okay, falling numbers, good question. So falling number is a representation of pre-harvest sprouting. Okay, so when wheat matures, the seed dries in the head. And then that seed goes dormant, and it stays in a dormant state until something triggers it to germinate, as if like you planted it. So excess moisture can cause that to happen even before you harvest it. So a falling number is a measure of, has the process started in the seed for germination to occur? Okay, and so they're measuring amylose activity, which is amylose is the enzyme that breaks down starch for sugars, because that's what has to happen for the seed to germinate and start to grow. So the way the falling number test works is they grab a sample out of your load when you bring it in, they grind it in like a coffee grinder, and then they add there's an extract or in some deionized water. I don't remember what all they add to it, or I don't know what all they add to it.
Just water.
Just water?
Yeah,
Okay,
just water.
thank you. And then then you put a bobber in it, and what you want is a thick consistency. Okay, the thicker the consistency, the more starch that there is in there. So you want that bobber to fall really slow, and it's just a measure of how many seconds does it take for it to fall to the bottom. Basically, that's the theory of the test. So a high falling number means you have good starch quality. From a milling quality, that's exactly what they want. They want 300 seconds or higher on the falling number. So when you get falling numbers below 225, 230, and lower, that's when you start seeing discounts for falling number. So what are the conditions that favor pre-harvest sprouting?
Rain.
Rain. During when?
Dry down?
Toward the end of dry down, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So, or even frequent, like really heavy dews can contribute to that also. There is a bit of a variety response, so not all varieties are the same. Red wheats and white wheats are different in their response. The white wheats tend to have a much higher pre-harvest sprout risk. In fact, we pull samples at physiological maturity, so we go out in our variety trials, and after it's turned yellow, the stem, we clip samples, we take them to the greenhouse, we put them in a mist chamber, and then we rate visually how much of the head has sprouted. Okay, so we've created the perfect conditions for sprouting. And so I think last year the average of the white wheats was 7.3, the average of the red wheats was 2.7 on a 1 to 9 scale, with 9 being everything sprouted, 1 being nothing sprouted. So there is a difference in what the varieties and whether it's red or white wheat. Other questions? All right, we're approaching harvest. So there's some things that I want to just kind of remind you. We want to harvest as high quality wheat as possible. Wheat is a food crop. Our millers grind it up and sell it to companies that make all kinds of cookies and crackers and breads and pastries and whatnot from it. So our job as a grower is to try to produce not only high yield, but an economic yield as well as a high quality crop to the miller. Okay, and I know that's the goal of everybody. Everybody wants to do that, and they get frustrated when there's discounts. But the millers are trying to, they're trying to meet the demands of the companies that they're selling their flour and their products to as well. And if they've got low quality product coming in, that's why the discounts occur there. Okay, that came early. So you have 2 handouts in your packet. I'll let you look through those. There's a number of things for harvest to remember. The one on the bottom is the one I wanted to highlight the most, is be safe. It only takes a split second for an accident to happen, and just make sure you remind your family, your kids, your grandkids, your employees, everybody to be safe. There's a lot of moving parts, sometimes long hours, hot days during wheat harvest. Just make sure you just take a minute to remind everybody to slow down enough to think before they put their arm in something or step in front of something and cause a potential injury. Okay. Any final questions before we rotate?
What kind of moisture are we looking for to harvest this year on a year like this, Dennis? Should we be harvesting above 15, 16%?
So, as in what grain moisture?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is, what kind of grain moisture should we target starting harvest? I think that depends a little bit on the weather conditions at the time. If we're in a rainy spell, I would push that number as high as you're comfortable. Push that up into the upper teens if you can. I know there's drying costs that incurred there, and if you have the ability to dry on your farm, then maybe you want to push that a little higher. But if you get into where it gets wet and dries out, you start losing that kind of that phantom yield loss. And so I would try to, 2 years ago when we had the pre-harvest sprout problem, everybody's like, oh, I'm at 15, 16, I'm going to wait another 3 or 4 days, and then they couldn't get it out. And then even red wheat sprouted so bad that nobody would even take it. So don't put yourself in that position. You got to kind of play the weather and figure out where you're at. But and if you're a white wheat grower, quality is even more important on white wheat than it is on red. Start a little bit early on your moisture.
Dennis, can I add something to that?
Sure.
A lot of your delivery points are encouraging you to harvest it before it gets that maturity, so you might see a shrink only to 18 program because they want you to harvest high quality wheat.
Okay, did everybody hear that? There's a lot of delivery points that are encouraging you to harvest early, so some of them are only doing shrink down to 18%. And the idea is to encourage you to start harvest early. Yes, yeah, that's great. All right, I think we better load up and get headed.